This video is going to look at the Criterion D rubric that we use to grade science essays, and it's going to look at a good example of a science essay to try to help clarify what the different requirements are. So Strand or Criterion D has 4 strands like the other criteria. So D1 is explaining the application of science to deal with problem or issue. Really what you need to do here is outline the problem, some details about the problem that your essay is focused on, explain in detail the scientific concepts that explain how the solution works to treat the problem. And this really includes the foundation science as well as some of the more minute details about how the solution treats the problem. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that when I look at the example essay. And then back up your points with cited statistics and quotations, rather than just kind of rambling on with your own writing, which we do want you to use your own words, but we also need you to show that you found this information with reputable sources, and you're not just making things up. Strand 1, I think, really goes along well with Strand 3, the application of scientific language. So as you use scientific vocabulary, make sure that you define and explain it when you include terms, so you show that you understand their meaning or can at least explain their meaning. Watch for mistakes with the use of scientific language. That means revise your work and edit your work to make sure what you've written makes sense. Use your own words. Do not copy and paste from internet sources. If you do, we will most likely catch you. And that kind of defeats the point of the essay. We want you to look at different sources, pull key ideas from those different places, and then synthesize them into your own understanding. So it should be your own writing. And stay focused on the problem and the solution and the related factor that you've chosen. Try not to get caught up listing unimportant statistics or ideas that aren't really key for the point you're trying to make. And then finally, you'll get graded based on the proper use of internal citations and the use of the Nature Publishing Group Vancouver citation style in your bibliography. So if we look at this essay, this is an essay that we no longer assign, but it's on stem cell, the use of embryonic stem cells to treat a disease and whether or not that's ethical. So just I'll try to point it out without reading through the essay. This person has set up the original research question that was presented by the teachers. The whole first paragraph really is outlining the problem. And that's really the initial part. You can't really explain the solution unless you outline the problem. Now, throughout the 2 paragraphs, and the second paragraph here is really about the solution, how the stem cells work. Throughout these 2 paragraphs, the person is explaining the scientific vocabulary. So they mention dopamine in this first paragraph, and then right after they mention dopamine, they go on to explain what dopamine is. In the second paragraph, when they introduce embryonic stem cells, they explain what those are. They're derived from human embryos when they are 4 to 5 days past the process of fertilization. They also explain terms like pluripotent, meaning that they have the ability to transform into any cell within the body. So anytime one of these important vocabulary terms that's sort of key to the biology, the chemistry, the physics is introduced, it should be explained or defined to show that you've taken the time to understand the meaning of those words. The points have also been backed up with quotations and with statistics. So as they introduce the disease of Parkinson's disease, notice they have statistics about how many people are affected in countries and worldwide, and what type of people are more likely to be affected. Notice these end with the internal citation numbers. Now, this person made the mistake of using subscripts instead of superscripts. That's a pretty minor error overall. The key thing is that they're citing their sources. In the second paragraph, we can see that they have quotations to help back up some of the points that they're making about the solution. So in terms of setup, they've outlined a problem, and then they've explained the science behind the solution. Now, in explaining the science, the person did not just say that these stem cells are injected into the person and that helps fix the neurons in the person's brain. They actually went back to the sort of foundational science and explained what embryonic stem cells are, where they come from, what it means that they are pluripotent and why that's important, and why that's going to allow them to work as a solution. So in addition to just explaining the end point, how the stem cell actually gets administered to a patient, how it might fix the problem. They're really explaining some of the foundational key topics that really maybe were even covered in class, and this is the opportunity to show in your own words that you can explain the meaning of those scientific terms and put together all the scientific concepts to explain how the solution works. The other aspect of the essay that tends to maybe give people more trouble is looking at a wider implication of the science. So a very common one that we use a lot in the science department is looking at the ethics of the scenario. So you have this scientific solution, in this case, embryonic stem cells, and then beyond just whether or not embryonic stem cells can work to treat a problem like Parkinson's disease, is considering, is it ethical to use embryonic stem cells to do so? And so really the key is that you're going to look at both sides of the situation when you do this. I think I maybe skipped over Strand 2. So Strand 2, wider implications, make sure that you state your chosen related factor clearly. Sometimes it gets assigned to you, like in the stem cell essay, it was assigned that you should consider the ethical implications of using embryonic stem cells. But if you get to choose one, like social or cultural or environmental, make sure it's clear which related factor you're talking about. Make sure you consider viewpoints from both sides. Consider things that are maybe have positive impacts on the environment, but also maybe the negative impacts on the environment. Consider the viewpoints of people that think using stem cells is ethical, but also consider the viewpoints of those that think it's unethical. Even if you strongly disagree with one side, you get graded in this aspect of whether or not you've presented both sides completely. Just like in explaining the solution, try to use cited statistics and quotations whenever possible to help back up the points that you're making. So it's not just your opinion that you're explaining on both sides. You're actually looking at the opinions and ideas of other people, maybe experts in a field on both sides. Then at the end, you're supposed to come to a conclusion where you look at both viewpoints and describe your overall answer to the assignment's research question. So in this assignment, looking at the answer to whether or not it's ethical to use embryonic stem cells to treat a disease. And finally, when you're doing that, you may want to consider evaluating the quality or the credentials of your sources as part of that evaluation, as part of coming to your conclusion. So in this essay, the person has looked at the ethics of using embryonic stem cells to treat Parkinson's disease, and does a good job of looking at both sides of the story. So we've got, in order to create, let's see, I'm going to try to find these points. Many find that the use of human embryos is unethical, as it is the act of killing a human life. They compare it to having an abortion, and they believe that the embryo has full potential to transform into a human life. So they're essentially saying that doing embryonic stem cell research is equivalent to murder. However, on the other side, those people say that since it's not in the uterus, it cannot have any emotions or have any sensations. And even if it was implanted into the uterus, the success rate is quite low. So there's the potential that the embryo would have died anyways. So we've got a against point here, so like a minus point there, and then we've got a couple of positive points here. When we go on to the next paragraph here, they use a couple of more points for each side. So we've got one here. Embryonic research supporters believe that since excess embryos will probably never be used or will be discarded, they should be donated to help the greater good. So there's a point for the people who think it's ethical, who think they should be used. And then you have a number of points here about people, and including quoting that it's from the Catholic Church or religious groups, saying why they don't think that it should be ethical, why they're opposed to embryonic research, basically that humanity can't decide who is and who is not deserving of protection. Now, in the end, this person goes on to have a conclusion, and they say what they end up believing. So they believe it's justified and that it's ethical to use embryonic stem cells in disease research and in treating diseases. And they kind of balance the points, and they say which points they are basing this on. So it's, since they would probably never be used, and it's unpredictable that they would ever develop into humans. Therefore, using it to cure people suffering from debilitating diseases is fully moral or ethical. So they've kind of balanced it. They could maybe go a little bit further, but they have come to a conclusion after looking at both viewpoints, and they're justifying their conclusion, why they think it's ethical in the end. Therefore, I believe that the use of embryonic stem cells is ethical, as it can salvage millions of lives that would otherwise never be saved. So in their opinion, because embryonic stem cells can save many people from bad diseases, it's worth destroying embryos that could potentially turn into human beings, but probably won't. So I think they fully justify themselves in why they think it's overall justified. And so then the last criterion has to do with documenting your sources. So this has to do with in-text citations using superscripts, and then using the Nature Publishing Group Vancouver system for a bibliography. This may have been from the time when we did MLA citations, but they're fairly similar. Remember, you can use EasyBib to help you come up with the proper bibliography following the correct that correct Nature Publishing Vancouver style. And then it's your job to include superscripts as you go to make sure that we know where you got different statistics and ideas that are not your own. And also, if you look at the quality of the sources, this isn't Wikipedia for everything. This is coming from encyclopedias of medicine, Parkinson's Disease Foundation. So different types of sources, mainly all online, but more reputable sources than just your average sort of Wikipedia. So the expectations for a Criterion D essay are going to vary slightly if it's assigned to be done at home versus in class, but the basic structure of the essay remains the same. Outline the problem and explain the solution, really focusing in on explaining scientific vocabulary that you use, both the foundational topics as well as more specific topics to the essay. Look at the related factor from both sides. Try to use quotations and statistics throughout to support the different viewpoints, and eventually come to a conclusion based on what you've presented to answer the research question. And throughout, make sure that you've cited your sources internally and that you have a full bibliography at the end, and that you've used your own words throughout. Do not just copy and paste. And if it's written in class, then you can't really copy and paste. And so that's part of the reason why we do it in class sometimes. Hopefully that has made the Criterion essay a little bit clearer. And if you have any questions, ask your teacher in class.